This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and barely a month ago, this evening's guest sat on the boards of Anglo-American and Kumba Iron Ore. She hasn't told us why she left those boards. We'll find out this evening. But since the beginning of this month, she's been in charge of Business Unity South Africa. Some commentators have called her appointment, says it comes at the most critical time when business and government in South Africa need to understand each other better. My guest is Khanyisile Kweyama, who is the Chief Executive of Business Unity South Africa. Before we get to Business Unity South Africa, that was a very sudden switch out of Anglos and Kumba and into Business Unity. Have you been deployed?
We can call it deployment because, as you know, it is a secondment to Business Unity South Africa, and it was actually announced last year around December or so, and I only moved over mid-January because of holidays and all those things.
How relevant is Business Unity South Africa in a divided business community, in a divided society where unions don't trust business, business don't trust unions, neither unions nor business trust government, and government doesn't trust anybody else either?
Maybe if you look at it from the multiple stakeholders that you've talked about, then more very relevant in that you have to have one voice of business. Otherwise, unions, government, other stakeholders, global stakeholders are talking to many different voices, and the voices may not always connect. So you need the one voice that takes all the different interests and all the different voices and puts them together so that we have one voice of business.
But there isn't one voice of business. There's BUSA,
yes,
and there's the BBC, and there
yes,
are other organizations as
yes,
well. Business doesn't have a single unified voice.
As you probably know, the purpose of setting up BUSA many years ago, long before my time, was to unite business. But you are not always going to get homogeneous all across. So we try as much as possible. We are the largest, at least with people, with various stakeholders unified under one umbrella, you know, and BUSA has also migrated from one form to the other, where about 2 years ago the decision was to, rather than have individual members, but to have the associations who represent business. So we've tried, you know, to roll it up so that it eventually lands. It's not easy. It doesn't happen every day, but I think we attempt to bring out one voice of business, because in the end, if you are going to preach the same agenda, which is about the economic growth of this country, because in the end, that's really what it's all about. Everything else falls into place. Then the more coherent you are, the better you are.
But when President Jacob Zuma talks about we speak to business, we want to do deals with business, we want business and us to work together,
yes,
is he talking about the Black Business Council, or is he talking about Business Unity South Africa?
He's talking about both, and you will see that when the president calls various multiple stakeholder forums, he calls BUSA and BBC. Now, you know that the history, BBC used to be part of BUSA, but there was a split. And I think to then say, well, we will only call BUSA when a sector feels left out. So he calls BUSA and BBC. And with BUSA, I think that key stakeholder is satisfied that we have mopped up all the business groupings except BBC. But we go together to many forums, and often we say, let's talk before, so that we do have one voice of business. But the voice that comes out is eventually BUSA and BBC.
Why doesn't the government trust you? Business in general, not you, but
yeah, no,
business in general.
I think first historical, that if we want to wave away the fact that there has been a legacy of 20 years ago, you may say, and that trust hasn't been bedded down firmly enough that you can say they are my buddies, we trust them. But at the same time, I think there is a lot of expectation on business, you know, solve the problems, some of them you caused yourself, therefore solve, and it is unrealistic. There has to be a working together rather than a pointing of fingers and saying you caused this, therefore. Some of the problems are not ours as business, to be frank.
Everybody talks about working together. You've just used the term, the president uses the term, every time there's an open microphone, he goes, we must work together we can do more. And he's absolutely right.
Yes.
Yet, all these forums. What actually happens in these forums? People go to these forums, everybody talks nicely, and then everybody goes back to the trenches and starts shooting each other the next day.
A lot comes out. I mean, I think you can look at even the NDP and the commission.
Does that still exist?
That had, well, the term ended, I think, last month, and there were calls for nominations for the new term. So I suspect that any time now we should hear an announcement. So there you have a representation of businesses, civil society.
Is anybody treating the NDP as seriously as it should be treated? Because people pay lip service to it. But is anybody treating it seriously enough?
Business does, you know, because we are part, business has been part of the commission, you know, in the forms of Babu Gatsel, Jerry Vilagazi, and other business people. So, yes, we take it seriously, but I think there is still work to be done to say how do we roll out, you know, beyond the blueprint, beyond the plan, to actually go. But I see in many companies' annual reports where they say we are aligned in this manner, including with Anglo American, where we said, you know, these are the pillars of the strategy at Anglo American. This is how the NDP forms its pillars and forming alignment. Now that just says you take it seriously, because you can't at board level say, let us check if it's not serious.
So business is taking it seriously because it's an acceptable plan for business. Now, anything that's acceptable for business usually upsets the unions. Unions don't like the NDP at all. They would like to see it join every other policy document that's been printed in the last 20 years, because it doesn't have a sufficiently freedom charter-based sort of association. It doesn't talk about redistribution enough. It doesn't talk about that sort of stuff. It's got more of a free market feel to it. Government is chummier with the unions than it is with business. Has it got any hope of actually getting off the ground in a meaningful fashion?
I chuckle when you say that, because sometimes unions accuse government of being chummy with business. So I guess it depends on what the topic is. And I just think everyone has to, my overarching statement, if you wake me up in the middle of the night, I will always say, whatever the differences, you have to make this economy grow. Because if we get bogged down in differences and don't jumpstart things, we won't have an economy to speak of in a couple of years.
There was a great conference that happened in Johannesburg a couple of weeks ago, the Tipping Point Conference, dramatic title, run by the Associations of Savings and Investment South Africa, ASISA. Some of the top business minds in the country were there. Everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, talking about we must work together, we must do more. And then the speeches die quietly. Does anything happen after that?
Well, a lot happens, and you know ASISA are members of BUSA, so you said the correct one, and I was at that conference as well. And the Minister of Economic Development spoke, ANC via Enoch Godongwane, and we've had subsequent interactions with ASISA as business to say it shouldn't be an ASISA voice only, it should also be how does that link in with the various sectors, how does it link in with the construction industry, with the engineering industry. So that is the work that is going on behind. So I assure you, it wasn't just the show at Convention Center, there is work going on in the background. Because they are going to fund it, but they need to link into the NDP, IPEP, different infrastructure program and all.
There is lots of money sitting on company balance sheets. There's 6 trillion rand sitting in savings in ASISA funds and accounts. It can't all go to infrastructure, it can't all go to government projects. But if there was a greater level of trust and people had investment certainty, we could apply some of that capital.
And that is my role, that is our role as BUSA, to ensure that we just keep on working at it. And as you know, even in your own marriage, you just don't trust Bruce tomorrow.
My wife trusts me all the time. It's a very bad example.
Bruce has to work at it, but you must maintain it and keep it going before things like that.
But my sense of it is that it is a slow and laborious, plodding process. We don't have time, or do we?
Well, I'm hoping that part of my deployment is to ensure that we accelerate it, because there was a vacuum, you know, in terms of leadership and knocking at the correct doors all the time. And you have to work at it more regular than just visiting it when there are forums and all. Behind closed doors, going to the next level, moving beyond the presidents and the ministers, working with the director generals, with the advisors that advise these people, same on business. And I think if I rattle off in the past couple of, you know, we've interacted with Home Affairs, we've interacted with transport.
Where does BUSA stand on visas? Talk about Home Affairs.
BUSA, and that is, I called that upon myself by mentioning it. But we had a meeting with the Minister of Home Affairs with his top management team, where we say we understand that any country requires visas. We understand that there is people come here not only for business, for tourism, but there's terrorism, there are those who come and hide. We have a Black Widow that did that, but we are saying that there has to be a relaxation just in terms of making sure that those that have come through the screening process and are deemed to be legitimate, then their life should not be made difficult. You know, whether it's on an employment basis, whether it's on a
tourism
tourist
is
basis,
such a crucial
because
engine
it's very
room for this
crucial.
growth.
It's a big part component of the economy. But what we can't do is be, I think, and that's what Minister was telling us, saying that he can't be too lax because there are huge security risks as well. What we
But
don't
then
want
let the security cluster do its job, and
Yes.
let Home Affairs do its job, and let tourism
Absolutely.
do its job. Let's
Absolutely.
get this economy going together.
Absolutely.
Do you feel sometimes like you're bashing your head against a brick wall?
No, I don't feel brick wall. Frustration doesn't always be an equivalent to brick wall, because brick wall means you can't penetrate and you can't go through. But there are enough of breakthroughs that we feel we are getting there. There are others where we feel we still have to work much harder at it. You know, there's carbon tax issues, there's all that.
What keeps you motivated, though, when you come up against barriers and when you come up against bureaucrats and when you come up against people who say we share the same goals, but they're obstructive rather than providing a conducive environment for business to do what it needs to do?
There are enough pockets that understand, you know, that understand trade, that understand business, that understand, I mean, my finance ministry, treasury and all that. I think those are some of the stakeholders that we deal with that give us the hope that they understand where we are. They understand. When you had the minister's budget speech, you know, he talked short of austerity, and that is the language that business wants to hear, so that we are not the only ones taking measures to reduce headcount, to make sure that salary increases are in line, you know, to just create a proper environment. And when you hear it from the Minister of Finance, who is also the custodian of the purse, then at least you know that you are making a breakthrough, and there's enough of them, and there are those that we still need to work at, and that is why we have jobs, I guess. So
the patience of a saint. Business Unity South Africa Chief Executive Khanyisile Kweyama will bring government and business closer again tomorrow, we hope. We live in hope. But certainly Khanyisile doing some very good work there in the background of trying to get the trust restored so that we can move forward. Till then, good night.